Hello and welcome back to the Awakening Philosophy podcast. My name is Jed. We are in the Meno. Last time we were talking about the significance of what we are doing in this channel and by reading the Meno. Why do we care about the Meno so much? Why are we taking the time to look at it in detail, understand it? And also, why are we looking at Socrates himself? How is he demonstrating the very thing that he is defining? So, one of the great puzzles is, if Socrates is so great, as everybody claims he is, what makes him so great? Well, it's not how far he can throw a football. It's not how fast he can run. It's what he said. It's what he understood, knew, and said. That it's for those reasons that we consider him the great and perhaps the greatest. Well, what was he saying? He was talking about how to be the best human being we can be, or virtue, or the excellence of the soul, or what we should be doing here, or the meaning of life. Not only should we be listening to what he said, what about him as a person? Shouldn't we be trying to ourselves be like Socrates? In other words, if he is so great for what he understood and said about virtue, about how we can be, wouldn't he have been doing it himself? So this is what we're doing. We're listening to what he is saying about virtue, or the best we can be, and we're looking at how he's doing it. It's good to have an example of the thing we're trying to be, right? Like if you wanted to learn football, European football, soccer, you would want to understand and learn, but it'd be nice to be able to look at a Messi or a Ronaldo to get an idea for what it would be like to have a mastery of the game, have a model for the demonstration. Now, we know that definition and demonstration are the first two categories of the very thing that Socrates is defining and demonstrating, the dialectic. The dialectic has four categories: definition, demonstration, division, and conclusion. Conclusion is sometimes called synthesis and analysis. Definition and demonstration is what we're doing. Can we define what it is, and can we have a look at Socrates demonstrating it so we can have it ourselves? So that's what we're looking at. And the irony or the puzzle is, why aren't we doing this every day? If people recognize that Socrates is so wonderful, and he's the guy quoted for a model of wisdom, why aren't we doing it? Why aren't we listening to him? And why aren't we looking at him so that we can define, understand, and ourselves demonstrate him, whatever it is he is embodying? Now, there are a few ways of addressing that question, historically, of course. One way is by saying, well, all of the translations we've had of Socrates have been rubbish. And that's what we've been seeing as we've been reading. Socrates is talking about virtue, and he's linking it to something called the dialectic, which allows us to move from a lack of virtue or vice, which isn't just a lack of virtue, but it's to mistakenly think something is virtuous when it isn't. Philosophical ignorance. Now, actually, that's not right. Philosophical ignorance is usually a term used positively, often in the symposium, when you realize you don't know. You're aware you don't know. You're aware that you don't know something you once thought you did, which makes you open and curious and ready to actually find something out. Now, what we are talking about is regular ignorance, which isn't not knowing, but it's to mistakenly think you know something you don't, which keeps you trapped, which keeps you certain, which keeps you closed-minded. We want to get out of that. And the sorts of people that Socrates talks to when he demonstrates the dialectic are people like that. Like Meno, the main character or the interlocutor of this dialogue. So the irony is that the translations of Socrates up until now have been in the style of Meno, the sorts of people that Socrates talks to get them out of their problems, to get them out of their ignorance. It's wild. It's like we've been reading Batman stories from the perspective of the Joker. So we've really been lacking an ability to really understand Socrates' words and really see him demonstrating it. But also, we've missed this fantastic gift that is an amazingly written text. There are puzzles in here for us to solve. We can become curious. We can see twists. We can see, it's a Sherlock Holmes kind of novel. There are things, but the difference between this and Sherlock Holmes is this is actually about reality. This is actually about you. And in solving these mysteries, you walk away with something greater than the satisfaction of having solved the puzzle of a game or a video game or a novel. You walk away with a upgraded soul. You have new insight and understanding that you then see through and can function through, and it's insight and understanding about the most important things that we are here to do. Isn't that neat? Yes. So, thankfully, one of those reasons that we are not getting into the most important thing, we don't have a good translation. We've had the tragic translations that often flip everything over. We have overcome that now because we have the Balboa translation. Which is a translation which actually keeps the actual ancient Greek text in there. And has an English translation which is actually accurate, which because the translator is actually someone who has gone through the process of learning philosophy. So he's not ignorant. So it's not a how-to BMX guide written by someone who's never seen a bicycle before. That's what we've been dealing with up until now. So, but thankfully for us, we have this translation and we can actually do the rational thing. If Socrates is so wonderful, let's read what he has to say and see how he's demonstrating it so we can get it ourselves and understand why he spent his life doing this. And maybe unpack the mystery. Why is Socrates considered so amazing? All of Western thought is naught but a footnote to Socrates. And we're doing that, so good for us. We're playing the true philosophy game. So let's jump in and keep reading. Okay, so we're looking at how we are loosely calling this the demonstration section of the text because he's asking Meno to demonstrate the paradigm, which is something we ended up with in the definition section of the text. Socrates used several different dialectics. And taken as a whole, that section ended with the conclusion: here is the paradigm that you can use. A paradigm for getting definitions. A paradigm for going from the many to the one. Whoa, too dark. So the many to the one, important for understanding. Important for understanding, because to understand something, you've brought the many into a oneness. So if you want to understand anything, like what is the soul, what is reality, what is life, what is virtue, in order to answer that question, you have to know the method for answering questions. And that has been the theme of this text. The opening of this text wasn't Meno asking Socrates what is virtue, it's whether or not it can be taught. So here we are talking, so far, Socrates has been giving us dialectics to define virtue, but really, he started by saying, I don't know what virtue is. So we have a question: has he been defining virtue, or has he been doing something else? Has he been not teaching us what virtue is, but teaching us the method that we can ourselves use to come to our own understanding and insight about what virtue is? Not just what virtue is, if it is a paradigm, anything we're interested in. If we want to know what beauty itself is, if we want to know what the soul itself is, if we want to know what reality itself is, we would have to have a method or paradigm through which we can go from the many examples of these things that we see in our physical world, examples of beautiful things, examples of souls, many souls, to actually what it is in its essence. So maybe he's not teaching us virtue, but he's teaching us what it means to think, or how to think, or how to learn. Can virtue be taught? Well, Socrates' response to that was, how can you describe the qualities of something if you don't even know what it is? If nobody knew who Meno was, would it make sense to ask him, hey, is Meno handsome? Is Meno rich? So if you don't know what virtue is, does it make any sense for you to ask me, can it be taught? That's Socrates' response. But we can take it one step further. To ask whether or not something, okay, so there's two parts to Meno's question. What is virtue and can it be taught? Socrates is pointing to this one and saying, hey, here are some lovely balloons for your lovely question, Meno. Before you ask me about this, you got to understand it. You got to understand what virtue is, and you don't. I've met your teacher. He doesn't know what virtue is. I know what the people from your city are like. They don't know. They have an idea of what it means to be wise, being loud and confident, and what we would call a sigma or an alpha. As true today as it was then, but that's not true. But your other question is about teaching. Can virtue be taught? Just as you are using a term virtue that you don't understand, we can push the implications of that and say, is it also true that he's using another word in the two subject question that he also doesn't know? Excuse me. Does he know what teaching is? Can virtue be taught? Well, what does it mean to teach? What does it mean to learn? How do we go from many to one? And of course, in the text, Meno said, let's see it in the text. Everything that we are thinking about, everything we are reflecting on, everything that we are concluding about comes from the text. I am unable to find in what way you carry out your search in order to grasp one single virtue that applies to all, just as in the other cases. I don't know how to come to a unified conclusion from the many to the one. I don't know how to learn. So, Socrates is helping us understand how to do that, which we could apply to virtue or anything. He's given us some definitions already. Now we're in the demonstration section. So he's using it. He's demonstrating it. He's demonstrating it with Meno. Instead of just defining it for us, this is what virtue is. And this is how it relates to the dialectic. And in doing so, he is doing, even in the definition section, he is still doing DDAS. He's still defining it, demonstrating it, dividing it, and coming to a conclusion. And even in that definition section, he has 3 different sections, or 4. He has, it's wild. It's within the definition section, he has DDAS. And within each of those DDAS, he has DDAS, which is, it's turtles all the way down, folks. It's dialectics within dialectics. But of course it is, if it's the model for thinking, if it's the paradigm for reality, if it's how we think. Of course, Socrates would be using it. And that's what we started talking about today. Not just looking at what Socrates is saying, but how does he demonstrate it? How does he think? How does he talk? And it seems to be turtles all the way down. Okay, so to recap, Meno says, well, here is a quote that I like that agrees with my opinions. To desire beautiful things and to be able to acquire them. That's what it means to be good. And then Socrates did the wordle switch, changing one word as we see here. From dope to pope, from pope to poor, one letter shift. By beautiful, do we actually mean good? Do we actually mean good? Yes, so we are desiring of good things. By the way, when we desire good things, are you saying, does it appear that some men desire bad things? Yes, it appears that way. Is that because they think the bad things are actually good? Or do they actually recognize that they are bad and nevertheless go on desiring them? Now, the word is selves, go on desiring selves. Desiring good things. Do they go on desiring bad things in the physical world? Number 1. Number 2, because self has 3 levels. Do they go on desiring bad things in being, in the realm of philosophy? We're not after physical things, as we've been talking about today. We want to get to definitions that exist and hopefully see them, gain them, experience them, nous. And of course, above even the realm of being, with the selves as the honorific, the one self. Do we hold on to a bad definition about ourself because we think it's actually good and true? Would you hold on to a bad belief about yourself if you actually knew that it wasn't real? So, do we actually think that bad things are good, or do we recognize they're bad and still do it anyway because we're nasty, nasty, nasty children? Both, says Meno. Surely it truly appears to you, appears. It appears to you, O Meno, that anyone who recognizes bad things are bad would nevertheless desire it. Would you eat the bad moldy bread, even though you know it's mold? Would you eat the apple, even though you knew it had a worm in it? Meno says, yeah, of course. I know what people are like. What do you mean to desire? Okay, so we've left this issue and now for a moment to define the word desire, because he says we not only it's to desire good, beautiful things. Do you mean by desire to come to be self? Yes. So come to be is the idea here, come to be. In other words, when you desire something, you don't have it already. You want it to be yours. And Socrates is being really good by saying, by the way, you want it to be self. You want to have it. You want the Bugatti to be attached to your idea of self, or your bank account, or your girlfriend, or whatever it is that you're seeking. You're seeking because you want it to be a part of yourself. That's what motivates us. And it's something we don't yet have, so it's a coming to be. Is there anyone who is led to believe that bad things benefit? So let's quickly drop this down on the board. And my mouse is being silly. Okay, so desire, the word desire. So we're seeing him defining the terms, defining the key terms that we are using and carrying. Meno carries an idea of what it means to be good. And his whole culture does, and his family does, and his teacher does, much like our world. So let's define the key word. Desire doesn't mean to come to be. In other words, you don't have it yet. And you want it to come to be self. So it's not yet being if it's something you desire. And of course, it's to do with the self. Meno is, again, and how do we use this? We ask it as a question. Is it? And Meno says yes, so we go on. So we're not doing what modern philosophers do, which is sometimes called the Gish Gallop, where you make a million points all at once and come to some conclusion which is mental. But then because you've made so many you've made so many false conclusions along the way. And then at the end, everyone's just irritated. Or even in the news or like interviewers, they'll say like, here is a question, politician. And then they'll start making 15 different points that are all wrong. And the interviewer says, hang on a second, I don't agree with that. And they say, don't interrupt. No, you mustn't interrupt me. That's rude. Don't I have the freedom to just talk nonsense forever? No, that's not good. That's not learning. That's not truth. And that's not virtue. So you ask it as a question. Are you along with me so far? Do you agree that that to desire something means you want it? It's in a process of coming to be. You don't have it yet. And you want it to be the self? Meno says, yeah. Now, again, this is a definition. We could say this is a definition. We're defining a term. But we know definition is also the start of DDAS, definition, demonstration, division, and then conclusion. So if somebody isn't happy with that definition, even though this is just a simple definition within a greater dialectic, you can use the very same model that we're using in the whole conversation. You can use it again here. I'm not happy with that definition. In other words, the person says, no, I'm not with you. Then you go to the next category. Okay, let's give an example of it. Let's give a demonstration of that definition. So what would that be for desire? Well, if you really, really desire a sandwich, do you have the sandwich yet? No. And do you, when you really want that sandwich, you're hungry, we say, do you want it to be for the dog or for your friend? Or do you want it to be in yourself? Do you want it to be for yourself? Yeah, well, if I'm really hungry, I want the sandwich myself. Now that's a simple example or a demonstration of what we've defined. That might be enough. If he says, yep, you go to the next step. If he says, no, I'm not really following that, or I have some doubts. I think there are some things that you can desire that you already have, like love. Love is a desire, but don't they say that God is love? But surely God has to have everything. So you wouldn't say God is lacking and needs something to come to be. Then you can go to the next stage, which is division. Break it down into its parts. By the way, when you desire a sandwich, do you have it yet? When you desire a partner, do you have it yet? When you desire I don't know, a degree. So you can break it down. Therefore, even love as a desire means it's something you don't yet have. Or you can divide it into its aspects. If that doesn't work, you can say, okay, let's divide it into its aspects. When you desire something, you desire it for yourself. So you could say, I love my partner, but that includes a desire for her to be mine. So I'm going to put a ring on it. But not just that, I desire to have her eternally. I don't want to lose her. So these are aspects of coming to be. Now this depends on the person you're talking with. Now, you can say that's what it is. By the way, you can say, what if it isn't? Because the dialectic has two parts. So in this division says, well, what if it isn't a desire? What would follow? And you'd either come to a contradiction here. If desiring a sandwich means you already have it, and it's not something coming to be, what would follow? Would that be a contradiction? Would that be an absurdity to want something you already have? Or side A, if it is true, you come to some conclusion that it's necessary and beautiful, or if it doesn't happen, it's false or an absurdity follows. So from that you come to the conclusion. Again, it's a dialectic within a simple definition. So we could have done that because we are understanding the model that Socrates uses, which might be the model of what it means to be an excellent soul, to think properly. And here we have a Ronaldo, not of soccer, but of thinking. And not just thinking, but being. He's very explicit that he has left the body many times and he's experienced what happens when you die, and he knows what's going to happen when you die. So he can come back and say, hey, this is what we should be doing while we're here. So what kind of a person would be a demonstration of that? Well, it's Socrates, and this is the model he's using, and because we can learn it too, we can use it here. So, does desire mean coming to be? Not yet. And you want it for yourself? We didn't have to go down that train because Meno says, yes, I'm with you. I'm with you, buddy. Yep. For sure. What else would it mean, says Meno? Is there anyone who is led to believe that bad things benefit? So now that we have that definition in our pockets, we can keep going. Socrates said that earlier. That's part of talking, as part of the dialectic. Once you're agreed to something, you use it and you move on. Which means you have to be of good faith. You can't then at the end, if it's a conclusion that you're not happy with, you can't say, oh, I actually didn't know what that meant. Well, no, you did say you knew what it meant. You can't. That's not good faith. We have to build on what we have and use it. Is anyone led to believe that bad things benefit the one who becomes bad? Or do they recognize that bad things harm the one that in whom the bad things will be present? So now we can use this. If desiring means come to be, what does that mean? So we can see the logic unfolding. That would mean bad things come to be self. So we say therefore, and therefore we have 3 dots. Therefore, bad things would come to be self. If we desire bad things, would we want ourselves to be bad? If you desire a moldy sandwich, you would have the mold in your belly and you would get sick. Would you desire it? Okay. And also in this, Socrates is making a distinction. He's saying, look, there are 2 ways of being, of thinking here. Led to believe that bad things benefit, or recognize that bad things harm. So there's 2 ways of thinking. Bad things don't benefit. That's not what bad means. Bad things don't benefit the one who becomes bad. So bad things come to be self. In other words, that you are becoming bad yourself. Does anyone want to become bad themselves? Do you want to get sick? Now that sounds absurd. And Socrates is including the distinction between led to believe beliefs, a huge distinction central to philosophy. The difference between belief thinking, because you can believe any old crap. Usually it's beliefs you get from your childhood when you're too young to know better. Belief, led to believe, or recognize. What's the difference? And that's a question that you can have. What's the difference between being led to believe and recognition? Because Socrates is saying, is there anyone who is led to believe that bad things benefit the one who becomes bad, or do they recognize bad things harm the one in whom bad things are present? What's the difference? Meno says there are those who are led to believe that bad things benefit. So notice, Meno is picking up the language. Important. I don't know if he's learning yet. I don't know if he's being taught yet, but at least he's playing along. He can see a distinction. There are those who are led to believe bad things benefit, and those who recognize that bad things do harm. So there we have a kind of, he sees something already. So let's write that on the board. You can led to believe that, let's use purple again. Led to believe that bad things benefit. Again, we have an introduction going back to benefit. Going back to our, as we progress in our Wordle, we just change one letter if we can each time. So no big jumps. And each change, the person has to be in agreement. So no gish galloping or making big speeches to confuse people. So we have a change here. When we see that if desire means to come to be ourselves, then desiring bad things means that the bad things are coming to be ourselves, which means we are becoming bad ourselves. Now we can make one change or a conclusion. To becoming bad or becoming good means benefit. So you can be led to believe that bad things benefit, right? That's the essence of grifting or marketing or capitalism. To trick people, to lead them to believe with marketing and advertising and all that sort of stuff, that bad things actually benefit them, or to recognize that bad things do harm. Now we have harm and benefit. We've gone from beauty and ugly to good and bad to harm and benefit. Do they really appear to you to recognize that bad things are bad when they are led to believe that bad things are beneficial? No, they don't appear. Okay, so they're not compatible. So they're so they're not compatible. They are incompatible, or the Venn diagram does not overlap. So if you are led to believe that bad things are benefit, you cannot also recognize that bad things harm. You're one or the other. You have recognition or you're in belief. You've been conned or you can see it for yourself. Now, we can follow that, but also we're trying to understand how Socrates sees this, how he sees it with such clarity, how he thinks this way, and how he demonstrates or uses his understanding to benefit. Because while we're saying that bad things don't benefit, we're seeing that Socrates is benefiting his friend and us through time. So he's made a distinction between the cause. Some people appear to seek bad things. What's the cause? The cause is cognitive functions. People who seek bad things, if we recognize, which we've gone through, that's desiring something means you want it to be yourself. So if you're desiring bad things, you are becoming bad. So therefore, the people who desire bad things are desiring things that harm them. Why would you desire things to harm you? Why would you desire the bad bread that has mold on it? Because the cause is belief. You're led to believe because beliefs contain, well, it's not always true, is it? You know that. You have people in your family who have crazy ass beliefs. You just step out in the world and you'll see people from different families or culture who have what you consider crazy ass beliefs. Beliefs don't have to be right, but beliefs can be bad and harmful. But recognition is different. What's the difference? Is recognition something you have yourself, and is belief something you get from someone else? Is this the importance of what we're here to do as human beings, to learn for ourselves? Or do you think our job here is to be slaves to the level of ignorance of other people? Just believe whatever they think. Let them evolve. Let's hope that their beliefs improve. Let's hope that they are going through some personal development. Let's hope they're doing philosophy so that when they give me their beliefs, it's better. In other words, my development is based on what this guy I'm believing does. Let's just hope, have faith that he is going to change for the better so that the beliefs I get from him are going to be better. Or do you think we're here to actually recognize things for ourselves? Doesn't matter what everyone around us is doing. Doesn't matter if they're attached to their ignorance. Our development isn't based on that, isn't dependent on what other people are doing, so long as we are going away from beliefs to our own recognition. Now, Socrates must see all this already for him to just use it so easily in the space of a few sentences to guide the conversation. Isn't that interesting? And maybe because we have gone through the process of reflecting on it ourselves, we are developing our own recognition so that hopefully it will become obvious to us because we have come to a recognition or understanding so that we see through it so we can use it. So whenever we're talking to our friends over coffee, cheers, and they say, oh, those others over there are evil and we should invade them or blow them up or something or get rid of them. What? Why? What makes them so bad? Oh, because they desire bad things. That's what makes them naughty or criminal or heathen. You add whatever enemy image word you want. And I'm sure you'll find someone like that if you just go out in the street or go down to the pub. Yes, we should harm those people because they're bad. You can use this. Oh, by the way, do people actually desire bad things? Oh, yes, that's why they're nasty, naughty people. Oh, is that because they recognize... Well, by the way, when we say desire bad things, do we mean to for it to come to be and to come to be us? Yeah. Yeah, if you desire the sandwich, you want it, and you want it for you. Yeah, of course. So to desire bad things means that you are coming to be bad yourself. Right, that's why we need to blow them up. Oh, but by the way, to come to be bad means harm, whereas coming to be good means benefit. Would anybody themselves desire bad things or things that do harm if they recognize for themselves that bad things harm? Or do they only seek bad things that would do them harm because they've been led to believe that bad things benefit the one who becomes bad? In other words, the problem isn't to do with their evilness or their naughtiness. It's a problem of cognitive functions. What cognitive function have they been taught at school, taught at home, taught in the culture? Meno, we can say, what's Meno's way of thinking? It comes from his family. We've seen that. Let's go back to the start just to be sure we see it in the text. It comes from your city, your culture. It comes from your family. He talks about his family somewhere here. Where? Your partner, your lover. And your family and your teacher. These are all things that influence what you think it means to be good. And what did he say is virtue? Oh, it says very easy. Very, very, very easy. Simple, Socrates. Of course I know it. Well, what is it then, buddy? Well, easy. Do good to your friends and harm your enemies, and never suffer harm yourself. Right? Very common, tribalistic bullshit. Right? When here you are having coffee, with your friend who thinks this way, we need to blow up the bad guys. And say, why? Because they're bad. Therefore, they are enemies. And virtue is blowing up the bad guys and being good to your friends. And then you've gone through this conversation we just went through, and you come to this realization that it's not because they're bad. There is something we haven't got to the cause of their belief, but Socrates alluded to it at the beginning. Someone or something has led them to believe the opposite of the truth, instead of teaching them to recognize truth. So this goes back to the theme today. Meno doesn't know what virtue is. Socrates was quite clear about that, even though he thinks he does. But his question was, can virtue be taught? Maybe Meno doesn't know what teaching is. Because if Meno hasn't learned the method for how to come to understanding that we are calling the dialectic, what's the method for understanding the dialectic? He is not familiar with it. So Socrates is teaching it to him. Then how can he recognize things? Because maybe that belief about virtue is bad and would be harmful to him. By the way, harming your enemies, aren't you forcing bad things on your enemies? Won't that be bad? How are you benefiting anyone, them, the world, yourselves, by inflicting bad things? Because people who say we need to do bad things to people, put them in prison, blow them up, is because we think that they will be benefited. We'll teach them a lesson. The Inquisition, the Dark Ages. All these holy wars. We're torturing people because maybe if we torture them, they will accept Jesus on their deathbed. And even though we're going to be murdering and torturing and plundering these people, it's for their spiritual benefit. That kind of bollocks justifies violence, justifies bad things. It will somehow benefit. So if Meno thinks that harming your enemies is virtue, he believes that bad things benefit. Did he come to that because he has himself recognized that bad things harm, or has he been led to believe that bad things benefit? So it's a problem of education. Specifically, the method of education. Are we teaching people to believe, or are we teaching people to how to recognize? Because one seems to do bad and one seems to do good or benefit. And our question is, well, what's that second one? What's the beneficial one? That's what we're learning. And if you can see it, if you can see this method of recognition, you can use it in your conversations with your friends over coffee. How can you relate to them in a good way that benefits because it leads them to recognition for themselves rather than leads them to believe whatever you're saying? Well, I believe we shouldn't murder those others. Well, I believe we should. Let's have a debate and post it on YouTube. Like every other philosophical conversation on YouTube. Debate bro nonsense. Like every other political debate. Debates themselves are that. How many people can I lead to believe my opinions? Dialectic is different. It's how can we be led to recognize for ourselves. This is the difference. And if you can go through these steps because you can see it this way and practice it with your friend, have more than one coffee with them, then maybe they can come to recognize for themselves that bad things to harm. And this difference in cognitive functions, belief compared to understanding, is actually the cause of problems, and you don't have to blow someone up, you crazy idiot. Okay, and by the way, they want to blow you up for the same reason. So the inevitable conclusion, or if we follow the dialectic, if that's the definition of virtue, blow up people who you think are bad, the definition would be good to friends and harm your enemies. And that demonstrates with you defining people other as bad, and that has the division. You call them your enemy, want to blow them up because you think they're bad, because they desire bad things is what makes you bad, and they'll be benefited by blowing them up. They think the same to you. There's your divisions. So definition, demonstration, division. What's the conclusion? Those are the 4 steps of the dialectic. What would be the conclusion of that world? What's the saying? An eye for an eye makes everyone blind. If everyone wants to blow everyone up, the destruction of humanity and our planet. That is the dialectic reasoning or recognition, understanding applied to this definition. This is what would happen. Isn't that interesting that you can just understand it? And it's simple, and it's not a matter of debate or opinion, it's just what would follow. Whereas here we are learning something else. All right, let's keep reading. Is there anyone who is led to believe bad things benefit the one who becomes bad, coming to be themselves? Or do they recognize that bad things harm the one in whom bad things would be present? Meno says, excuse me, there are those who are led to believe that bad things benefit belief. And there are those who, on the other hand, who recognize that bad things harm. So already we have some questions. Okay, if virtue is to be taught, it has to be something to do with this, recognition, and not belief. So maybe that makes sense of that earlier part of the text when Meno is demanding answers. Would that just serve as a belief? He either believes them or he doesn't. Whereas if Socrates says, actually, I'm not going to answer in the way you want, I'm not, for your sake and my own, I'm not going to give you answers in the way you want. But come along then, let's do something else. Maybe that's because that would just be a belief. And maybe that's not learning, and maybe that's not virtue. 2 questions that we have and we're carrying as we read. So we've been building questions as we go. What is virtue? Is it teachable? What is teaching? All right. Do they really appear to you to recognize that bad things that are bad when they are led to believe they're beneficial? Are they mutually exclusive? They indeed do not at all appear like this, of course. If you recognize bad things are bad, you wouldn't be led to believe that their bad things are beneficial. So this might be a remedy. If the diagnosis of the cause is belief versus recognition, then the remedy might be to gain understanding. So if you understand it for yourself, then that belief that was the opposite might fade in power. That's a hypothesis. If so, if Meno has a false belief, and we know he does, he believes he knows what virtue is, then is Socrates going through a process or a model or a paradigm of developing recognition? And if so, would that heal Meno? Would he be healed? If you recognize bad things are bad, can you at the same time be led to believe bad things are beneficial? No, says Meno. Is it not clear then that these people do not desire bad things, since they are unaware that selves are bad? Again, 3 levels of meaning when you see the word selves. You fill in the gaps. Read it as the particular things. So let's do it now. They do not desire bad things, since they are unaware that things are bad. Number 1. Number 2, they do not desire bad things, since they are unaware that selves in being, justice, virtue, beauty, truth, are bad. They do not desire bad ideas about being, God, reality. Okay, and the final one, they do not desire bad things, since they are unaware that that idea of self is bad. Self which is beyond even being. Okay, that's a reminder. Every time you see this, you have an opportunity to have some fun and play around, explore. This is a good conversation. I've had a conversation like this before, where there was a text where the word self comes in, and the whole conversation was about what could the 3 levels be? How can we read it in a particular one? That's usually the easier one. But how could this refer to what we are understanding about being? And then how could this refer to the self, which is beyond being? It's always fun to have someone to play philosophy with, because this one sentence could be a fantastic conversation that you can have over coffee. How can we find 3 levels in self here? All right. They don't actually desire, no one desires bad things. You dope trying to bomb or whatever, or genocide or blow up or imprison, since they are unaware that what they desire is bad. They desire things that they think are good, whereas they are indeed bad. They've been duped. So that it is clear that those who are unaware that selves are bad and instead think that they're good, desire good things. So that it is clear that those who are unaware that selves are bad, but they think that they're good, are actually desiring, even people who we think are desiring bad things. And the devil, evil, these fictions or fantasies, they're not true. They're actually desiring good things, they're just unaware. So, we have the stages. Desire, define, definition. So we could say, bad things are coming to be self. In other words, we could say that is demonstration. How does that definition function? Demonstration. How can we use that? The definition of desire has come to be self. How does it demonstrate? Well, bad things coming to be self, you becoming bad yourself. Okay, what's the divisions? The divisions is, and in division, usually we have a side A and side B. Side A is usually what is, if it is the case, and side B is what if it isn't. So you can argue something by saying, okay, let's assume it's true. What follows? And what's the conclusion? Is that conclusion necessary, true, beautiful, sufficient? Or what happens if it isn't the case? What follows? And does that end in a contradiction? Or something disastrous? Or an absurdity? Often humor is this. Humor is, this is my premise that I start with. And if it's satire, it can be the premise of some person who is a public figure who has a terrible premise. Like, I think, I don't know, women shouldn't be politicians. Okay, what would follow if that's the case? And is the conclusion something funny because it's absurd? That's satire. Which proves that this is wrong and therefore the opposite must be true. That's satire. Now, some humor is about the comedian himself. The comedian himself starts off in his funny, ignorant, stumbling premise. I used to think this, and then I wandered around like this, and this is what followed my way of thinking until this was the conclusion, and I suddenly realized that the opposite was true. And that sudden realization that this is wrong and the opposite must be true, that's the punchline. Oh, ha ha ha, I couldn't believe I thought that. Wasn't that funny? Wasn't I a clown? Now, some comedies, the audience gets the realization. So let's take, Steve Carell in The Office, just for an example. He has a false belief. We see the drama of the Office episode is the playing out of the implications of that false belief. The conclusion is absurd. That shows that his way of thinking is wrong and the other way of thinking is right, and we laugh. When we suddenly see both ways of thinking, we see the absurdity of what we used to have and the necessity for the other one. That's when we laugh. But in a comedy like that, that's just for the audience. The character doesn't learn, so we laugh at him. We call him a fool. Now, a stand-up is different. A stand-up comedian, for him to be telling the joke, he would have had to have learned. But in a sitcom on television or whatever, often the clown doesn't learn. Which is just side B of the division side of a dialectic. That's all it is. Now we can look at right-wing humor, and one of the questions that's topical at present is, how come right-wing humor is so bad? We're talking about The Office. The creator of The Office is Steve Merchant and Ricky Gervais. Ricky Gervais was Steve Carell's character in the English version, and he did stand-up comedy too, which used to be funny, but now he's terrible. He's not funny anymore. What happened to him? Now, same thing with Dave Chappelle. Why is he suddenly siding with Elon Musk and angry, bitter, old white men, or whatever? Well, Chappelle's not white, but these people who turn right-wing and suddenly lose their humor, what makes them so unfunny? Well, we can use this to have a look. There are only a couple of elements here. The first one is, where do they start? What's the false view that they start with? And often these people, they are portraying people who have a correct view as false. And so they manufacture the drama in order to prove them wrong, but it feels icky because it's not true, it doesn't work. Or they call it punching down. The person whose worldview they're making fun of might be in a really disadvantaged situation in society. They might be the most exploited people, or the most targeted people, or the biggest minorities, so they attack minorities. So there's where they start. Are they making fun of themselves and their own ignorance, or are they picking on people? Or picking on people who aren't ignorant at all, but they're blaming them for their own ignorance, number one. And the conclusion, therefore, the sudden realization of the absurdity of one way of thinking isn't there. It's not funny. There's no punchline, because it isn't absurd for that impoverished or that person in really struggling conditions. It's not absurd for him to think that way. If you were under society in that way, you would think that way. Or the way of being of this person was right to begin with, and so the sudden realization that way of thinking isn't absurd at all, it's being forced. So the punchline is like, ha ha ha, don't they suck? Or aren't they weird? Or aren't they just different to us? That's not humor. Look at these others, says these old right-wing comedians now, who might have started funny before they lost touch with the common man. The punchline isn't their way of thinking is absurd because of these consequences that lead to an absurdity or a contradiction. No. They're wrong because we hate them and they're different, and let's laugh at them. And because we are in the majority, let's all pick on them. Hey everyone, don't they stink? That's not funny. That's mean, bullying, punching down. And so, as a whole, the audience is not being led to realize for themselves the absurdity of that. They are being forced the conclusion that way of thinking is wrong, and the right-wing comedian's way of thinking is true. They are not being led to a conclusion, following the structure of the dialectic, defining a false belief, demonstrating it, showing the divisions of how that demonstration plays out, leading to a conclusion, definition, demonstration, division, conclusion, that shows us for ourselves the absurdity of that way of being, freeing us from it, as Socrates is saying. Once you recognize that bad things are bad, you are free from the belief that bad things are good. That is dialectic, and maybe is learning. That's the question of the text. And bad comedians forget to do that in their humor, and instead demand that their way of thinking is right, and don't show you the story, the narrative, the joke, the structure of the joke for you to realize it. They just insist that way of thinking that they're parroting is false, and they insist that their way of thinking is right. And it's so freaking cringe. It's so cringe. Ricky Gervais, where he's at, or what's another good example? Oh, Tim Heidecker has a fantastic free stand-up comedy special where he does this about those people. In other words, he satires this way of being that we are talking about. Bill Maher is someone who does that. He doesn't do a joke anymore. He insists that his way of being is right and the other way of being is wrong, without actually doing the dialectic, which is the structure of jokes. There's no jokes. Oh, and Tim Heidecker shows the absurdity of that actually with a funny stand-up, but he also has another satire of Bill Maher. So he satires those right-wing stand-ups, but he also satires Bill Maher, who is not a stand-up, but he is a very great illustration of this non-humor. Or Meno way of thinking, or Gorgias, Meno's teacher, a Gorgias way of thinking. Because he has a parody of Bill Maher, which is, it's fantastic. But it's so good that I can't watch it more than like 2 or 3 times because it's so cringe and it's so damaging to the soul to see more than once. But it's very, very good. It's if you're watching Tim Heidecker stand-up special, and Tim Heidecker, what's the name? A Club Random parody interview with a fantastic comedian. Who is it? Let me just quickly look it up. Tim Heidecker, Bill Maher impression interview with Fred Armisen. Fred Armisen is a fantastic comedian. He's one of the best. So, we're understanding how comedy works. That's interesting. And why, and the reason I bring it up is because it's a theme at the moment in the zeitgeist. Why do right-wing comedians suck? Because they don't do the dialectic. They instead insist on the conclusion, which is wrong, usually wrong. If it wasn't wrong, and by the way, they are not the character going through this realization. They're just mocking somebody else. That's not comedy. And what's the result? You either already agree with their right-wing nonsense or their bigoted nonsense, and you already believe that it's good to take pleasure in abusing people who are ignorant, or people who are subjugated, or people who are abused in the system, which is the pathologos or the right-wing movement. Let's get pleasure by thinking we are so great by abusing the minorities. If you already believe that, then you will agree with their conclusion, and you might even go to their comedy specials that aren't actually comedy, but you won't laugh. You won't laugh. You ever seen these right-wing sitcoms, or, I mean, sometimes they have fake laughter pumped in, but if you actually have a look at them, no one's laughing. They're clapping because they already agree with the beliefs that they are insisting the audience believe, but they're not laughing. Why? Because this structure that we're learning of the dialectic leads to recognition. You have to go through the definition of the way of thinking. Chris Rock is a good example. He'll just tell you the definition. Women can't go down in status when they date. They can't go down in status when they date. Women can't go down in status when they date. He'll just repeat the definition 10 times because that's part of his style. But he's a good example of the definition to begin with. Then you give a demonstration of that. I know a guy who dated this girl who dated a richer guy beforehand, and let me tell you about him. Then you have to go through the narrative or the divisions of what follow. How does this principle and this person play out? That's the division stage. That's the story. And then that leads to the punchline, what we call the conclusion. Or what we are seeing in the text, the realization. You realize for yourself by having followed the dialectic. And if it's a funny person, you laugh. If it's someone like Socrates, maybe you go, whoa, and you're in awe. That realization is when you have been carrying one way of thinking and you suddenly see both. You have two ways of thinking. You see they are incompatible and you jump from one to the other. That's the punchline. That's why you laugh. And these right-wingers who don't have the art of dialectic or the art of comedy, or have lost the art of comedy, these grifters, or they're either bitter old men yelling at clouds, or they're just grifters. Like, there are a lot of fake right-wing comedy stuff in Australia and in America that it's just fake. The people in the audience, so they just insist our way of view, our point of view is right, isn't it, everyone? Yes, and anything that's different, we will bully them and abuse them and mock them. We won't go through a joke. We won't go through the dialectic. to lead to a realization which can actually improve people, take them from what's false, the false belief that bad things are good for you, to what's true. No one actually desires bad things. They've just been tricked through belief. We're not going to do that. We're just going to insist on our belief, which is prejudice, is what racist people and prejudiced people do. And we'll mock anything different. But the audience never laughs, because the laugh has to come from a sudden realization. Just like if you explain a joke, there's a saying, explaining a joke is like dissecting a frog. If you dissect a frog, you might be able to understand it better, but you'll kill it. Same thing with a joke. If you have to explain a joke, you might be able to understand it better, but you'll kill the comedy, you'll kill the laugh, because it has to be a sudden realization for yourself. The setup, the division, the demonstration, the definition, the demonstration, the division, or the setup is to create the conditions for that punchline. In philosophical midwifery, which we do on the channel, is we realize a similar kind of thing is set up for our false punchline, a false belief about ourselves and the world. That's the cause of our problems. That's why we use a dialectic to address the cause of our problems in philosophical midwifery. Check out that on the channel. Therefore, these right-wing comedies, they don't have a punchline. They don't have, people just clap. What are they saying? Oh yes, I agree with that way of being and that belief, because I was also led to believe that way of being. So isn't that interesting? We can understand comedy and understand why half of the comedians stink, are hacks. What makes hacky comedy and what makes good comedy? What's the answer? The dialectic again. But you can't just tell somebody that. Because if you just tell someone that, they either will believe you if they were already led to believe it, or they will reject it if they don't already believe it. And how many people know about the dialectic? Almost none. In part because we haven't had good translations of Socrates, but there are many reasons. But the fact is, this is new. We are breaking new ground, people. But if you have followed along with this podcast, it doesn't matter what you believe or what others believe. Because if you followed along, hopefully we've followed the steps sufficiently where you have recognized it for yourself. So you can't tell someone, hey, hacky comedy is because you don't follow the dialectic. You just insist on a belief, and you insist people agree with the belief that you already carry without doing any dialectical work at all, which is called bullying. And therefore you're not going to learn, and the audience isn't going to learn either. No one's going to be learned. It's called being stuck or prejudiced. So that's why, old comedian, people are calling you a bully or stuck or prejudiced or right wing, because that's what you're doing. And what you could be doing, or the reason for you doing that, is you've abandoned the dialectic. They won't understand because they weren't led through the steps to recognize for themselves. But you and I will know it's true, and we will smile over a cup of coffee as we tell them. Or maybe we won't tell them. Maybe, I don't know, up to you. The point is, the realization or the punchline, the reason why no one laughs at them is because what Socrates said, are they incompatible? There's no crossover. There's no crossover in the Venn diagram. You can't be led to believe bad things benefit and also recognize or see for yourself, have the punchline, and see for yourself that bad things harm. You wouldn't desire things which harm you. It doesn't make sense. And the punchline is having both points of view at the same time. Oh, I thought this, or I was at least going along with the story of the comedian who thought this. When he got into this, I used to think, I don't know, I used to think that Mexicans were like this, and then I went to a party and I thought this, and then all this stuff happened and I came to the realization that Mexicans were actually like this, and I could no longer hold my prejudice about Mexicans. It's the moment where you have both in your vision as an audience member that makes you laugh. Because you have both, you see the absurdity of one, the necessity of other, and you do a jump. So it's kind of like learning. But for us, the point isn't humor. We can have humor. Socrates can be funny, and we can be funny. But the point is this: enlightenment. So you can say humor is of the nature of enlightenment. And some people who have enlightenment experiences say they laughed or it was funny for them. People who get high for the first time and suddenly realize some things about their perspective, they can spend all evening laughing with their friends. But we are seeing its movement from what's false to what's true. And if you laugh, then why not? Somebody once said, there are many ways of getting enlightenment. Why not do it? No, what did he say? The best is to do it with a smile on your face. All right, so let's see this within what we're reading. Definition of desire to come to be self. The demonstration. If you desire bad things, you will become bad. Division. Led to believe bad things benefit or recognize that bad things do harm. Conclusion. They are incompatible. No one would desire so that was the conclusion. They are unaware. So therefore, you're either led to believe that bad things are good or you recognize that they do harm. Therefore, unaware that bad things do harm. So this is our division was to say, by the way, division, so we got into this by talking, but in the division stage, you can divide up the arguments of what happens if it is or what happens if it isn't. And then that will come to your conclusion in the conclusion stage. But what's curious about this one is he does both. The division is, by the way, side A is bad things harm and side B is bad things benefit, and they're incompatible. There's the division. Therefore, conclusion, so that's the division stage of thinking or reasoning or virtue or dialectic or the meaning of what we're here to learn, education and nurture. And that leads to the conclusion. And the conclusion has two steps. Unaware that bad things do harm. That's our synthesis. What's synthesis mean? Synthesis takes what we saw in those divisions and synthesizes it into a conclusion. Therefore, if it's incompatible, is what we saw in our division, it's incompatible to believe that bad things benefit here and to recognize, different way of thinking, that bad things do harm. Therefore, we can synthesize that to a conclusion. They are unaware. They have been tricked through belief, and they don't have their own awareness. That's synthesis. Now, the next part is you take that synthesis, and the next part in conclusion is analysis. You take that synthesis back to the start. Why were you talking about this to begin with? Tie it back to the question. Therefore, it is clear then that people do not desire bad things since they are unaware that selves are bad. They desire things that they think are good but are indeed bad. So that it is clear. So no, this is when we see the word clear, our ears can prick up. So that it is clear that those who are unaware that selves are bad, but instead think that selves are good, desire good things. Meno says that is quite possible in their case. Now, he's being a bit of a wimp. He's not happy with this, so he's like, oh, yeah, that's possible. Wimpy sort of a thing. What next then? Okay, so what next means we're on to the next thing. So there's a conclusion there. Therefore, if it's unawareness, therefore, the whole point is, do people desire bad things? Meno says yes. And he needs to think that people desire bad things, because what else makes someone an enemy? A bad guy. Terrorist, they desire bad things. Yes, we should invade them. No one desires bad things. If you only desire a bad thing, it's because you've been led to believe the bad thing is actually beneficial, which is incompatible with recognizing, understanding, and seeing for yourself, getting the punchline, that bad things do harm. Therefore, they are unaware. So instead of dropping a bomb or shooting with a pistol, the bad guy, drop a awareness pillow. And instead of shooting a gun, shoot a awareness sandwich. Easy. So that synthesis, which goes to analysis, therefore, people do not desire bad things. That's taking the synthesis and taking it back to the topic. People do not desire bad things. That's our analysis. And conclusion has synthesis and analysis. A-N-A-L. Analysis. So we had a mini dialectic. Isn't that fun? So it seems that the text as a whole is a dialectic, because now we're in the demonstration part of the text. And we're just in the middle of a dialectic with Meno about his idea, which is virtue is desiring beautiful things and to be able to acquire them. That's what it means to be good, right? Very common. What's the excellence that you can have? What does it mean to be a high value male? What does it mean to be an alpha? What does it mean to be someone on their grind set or whatever? What's the ideal in our capitalist society? To desire beautiful things, to have good taste, to desire the right kinds of women and the right kinds of cars and the right kinds of things, and have the money and status to be able to acquire them. Right? Isn't that the best? To be rich and have good taste? Now, it's a different idea of what Meno started with. Harm your enemies and hurt your enemies and benefit your friends and get out of getting harmed yourself. But this is another one. Have good taste and have money and power. Sigma, high value male. Right? Well, to desire beautiful things is actually desire good things. That's what's behind that. and no one actually desires bad things. So how can you say one half of virtue desiring good things? How can you say that's virtue? Half of it doesn't even make sense, because no one desires bad things. Also plays into your other definition of what it means to be virtuous, harming people. Well, if there are no bad guys, who are you going to harm? Now, this applies to how we relate to someone like Meno, but as we was talking about last time, we are sometimes Meno. We grew up in our culture who thinks this way. This is our education too. We sometimes think that. Therefore, how do we recognize when we are being Meno? And how do we be Socrates? How do we relate to ourselves in a Socrates fashion? How do we do this? How do we be a good stand-up comedian? Now, we don't want to insist that, so even if the beliefs that we want to put into ourselves are true, like, hey, don't hate anyone because no one is actually bad. Everyone desires good things. It's just a matter of whether or not they have been taught through belief or recognition, which ideally is the dialectic and good comedy. That's the only difference. Now, even if that is a true thing, if you find yourself being a Meno to yourself, I'm not good enough, I'm a bad guy, I just desire bad things, I know this is bad, but I still want it anyway, I'm naughty, I'm a bad person, no one loves me, I'm never going to reach my dreams. Whenever you start talking about yourself that way, we might have the impulse to insist on what's true. That's nonsense. Don't be mean to yourself. You don't stink. You don't suck. That's not true. You don't desire bad things. You have a certain belief that has led you to believe this thing is actually really good for you. You haven't gone through the process of dialectic to recognize for yourself the truth about whatever you're talking about. Now, even though that's true, we still don't want to insist on it, because that would be being like Meno. It would be using Socrates' conclusions as a belief we're insisting on. That's the problem. So not only do we want to learn from Socrates what he's saying to gain true beliefs and stuff, and to gain our own understanding, not just, learn from Socrates to gain our own understanding, we also want to learn from Socrates how to demonstrate it, how to function with it. So even though it's true, don't insist on it like a bad right-wing comedian to yourself. What would we do to ourselves whenever we see ourselves being bad to ourselves? Harming ourselves, because being bad doesn't make you better. Harming yourself doesn't benefit. Telling yourself that you're not good because you do these things that you think are bad, that's not even true. It's not good, it's not true, it's not beneficial. It's harmful. If you catch yourself doing that to yourself, Menoing yourself, what are you going to do? Insist that it's wrong. You stink, Meno. Don't be mean to me, Meno. Oh, that's being Meno with Socrates' ideas. Instead, see this as an opportunity to practice the method. Practice being Socrates to yourself when you catch yourself as a Meno. Excuse me, self. Let's reason through. Could it be that I am actually bad because I desire bad things? And then go through these steps. Because not only are you reasoning against what's false, you are practicing a higher way of being, which is the whole reason why you want to get rid of those false beliefs, because it prevents you from being happier, from being better, from being more virtuous. So in addressing what's false in a manner that is great and virtuous, you are being great and virtuous, which was the whole reason why you want to convince Meno not to be Meno to yourself. So you're doing both. You're defining and demonstrating. So reason with yourself. Help yourself to recognize. Don't beat yourself up. Even when you catch yourself beating yourself up, don't then beat yourself up to say, don't beat myself up. Practice the other. What's the other? Dialectic. The kind, gentle way, the good way, that maybe is virtue. And you're not insisting on a belief, you're helping yourself to recognize, which can be funny, can have a punchline, can provide insight when you get to this point, when you see for yourself the difference, they're incompatible, and you come to a conclusion. That's learning and growth. Do it to your own soul. That's the point. Now, we could also extend that. If we see the value in that because we've recognized it, we can implement it, demonstrate it in our world, and then imagine the world that we would have. Whenever someone is actually doing something bad, instead of harming them or calling them a name, or I'm not going to say canceling because I hate the way that word's used nowadays, it's overused. Instead of putting them in prison or fining them or blowing them up or genociding them, we instead take that as an opportunity to practice the very thing Socrates says that we're here to practice, to get better at it ourselves, so we are getting better, but also we are helping them to get better. Because they can go through a process of recognizing for themselves the cause of their problem, having a punchline or insight, and then benefit. We would benefit by practicing it. They would benefit by practicing it. Then in society, we can just simply look at the societal conditions that cause people to have these false beliefs that bad things benefit, and address the cause of that, which again is a dialectic applied to institutions, which again, humanity is learning. No need for harm. No need for violence, no need for oppression, no need for inflicting harm, simply because we've got to the root of the root that is a false belief that we have been led to believe as a culture through recognizing, through practicing the art. So this is the importance of definition and demonstrating it to ourselves, to our friends over coffee, and to anything else in our culture, in our institutions, and in our world. And as a result, we have got an added benefit of not just a way of demonstrating ourselves, but a handy conclusion that we have realized for ourselves, that people do not desire bad things. And then why? We'll work backwards through the dialectic. Oh, because it's just because we are unaware that bad things do harm. Why? Oh, because we have just been led to believe that bad things benefit, which is inconsistent with recognizing that bad things do harm. Which comes from what? Well, if a bad thing comes to be in yourself, then you would become bad. Therefore, desiring means come to be in yourself. So we never desire bad things, because that would mean becoming bad ourselves. This is just because of a belief that we were led to believe, an absence of the dialectic allowing us to recognize for ourselves. The two are incompatible, therefore we are unaware. So it's an unawareness. And a conclusion, people do not desire bad things. Wow. Was that a great conclusion? Is that worth seeing about yourself? Is it worth seeing about how you treat yourself when you catch yourself being a Meno? Being bad to yourself? Everything could that mean every moment can be an opportunity to demonstrate or practice what we are defining here? And if this is virtue, every opportunity, even those negative self-talk or the negative beliefs directed towards others, even those moments are an opportunity, a gift, an invitation for us to practice virtue. What might be virtue is definitely a much better way of being. And is it a handy conclusion? No one seeks bad things. It's just a matter of unawareness due to belief versus recognition or dialectic. So, in the world, introduce dialectic, address belief. In our soul, always practice dialectic and introduce belief. By the way, does that fit with our other conclusion? If we are practicing dialectic, we are managing ourselves always justly and never unjustly. So if everything is an opportunity to practice dialectic, and we see it just from that, then also our previous dialectic showed us, oh, and by the way, that's justice. That's a way of knowing you're always being just by practicing your dialectic. Seeing every false belief or being bad or Meno to yourself is an opportunity to do it. You're going to be managing yourself justly and never unjustly. Is that a good way of being? Is it a fun thing to practice? Can you talk to your friends and practice this over coffee? Can we imagine a world where we implement this? Wonder what kind of a world it would be? And is it beneficial? Leave comments in the comments section. Was it beneficial to have gone through this and to recognize for yourself that people never desire bad things? Is it unawareness due to belief versus recognition? Does it help amplify the idea of the importance of the dialectic, which is the method to come to recognition? Is it a thumbs up from the universe on your journey? You're on the right track. Keep practicing it. Keep being virtuous, which managing yourself justly. If you want to join the Discord, you can share your experiences with us on Discord. There should be a link below. The text is free below. Oops. And hello, a new subscriber on the chat. Thank you for joining. Oh, thank you for joining, Oscar. Thanks for joining in the chat. Be sure to follow the link to our YouTube channel where you can see this and the previous videos in the series. And what a wonder today has been. Dialectic. Turtles all the way down, as we say. Thank you so much for joining. I hope to see you next time. Oh. So once again, thanks for joining me. I hope you had a good time. I hope to see you next time. And I hope there's been something for you to wonder about and carry in your mind until you get that delightful punchline or recognition for yourself. And if you do, please feel free to share it with all of us in the comments section or in the Discord that you can find a link to below. Thank you so much.